Well, good afternoon. I'm Brian Gray, the CEO of Remind, and today I'm going to talk about communication, specifically how we see it as being central to student success. At Remind, we see communication every day, and we see it really on three important levels. We see it as a conduit through which information is delivered. We see it as a means to build deep and long-lasting relationships. And we ultimately see it as a way to foster learning throughout schools. Before I dig into this, though, I want to share a little bit of my background, how I got to Remind, and why I'm so excited to be leading this company that I've been at for now 9 months. So usually at this point, to build some audience empathy and sympathy, I usually tell the audience that I have 2 teenage daughters, which I absolutely do. This is a photo of them, obviously several years ago, in my former world as a media executive. Now, they had no idea what I did every day, and in fact, it was always kind of funny because I think they thought that when I went to work, the view out my office window looked something like this because I worked in the sports business. And really, they didn't know what a CEO was. They didn't know what a business person was. They really just thought that I was associated with a bunch of brands. So I ran Yahoo Sports, I ran the digital business at Fox Sports, and most recently was the CEO of Bleacher Report. And in all of those places, it was funny because when overhearing my daughter at one of her play dates, when asked, "What does your dad do?" she said, "Oh, he's a sports guy." And she was right, I was a sports guy. But what I took from each of these places that was really important was truly understanding customers and users. So at Yahoo, fantasy sports users were a big part of what we did. At Fox, it was all about the video experience and how do you engage with the video experience. And at Bleacher Report, it was really how do you deliver a personalized experience for sports fans. So I took that and really focused on the passion of users and customers. What motivates sports fans? What drives them? What brings pain to sports fans? And unfortunately, we know what that is, it's losing. And ultimately, I needed to also understand what fueled sports fans. How did they live day in and day out and be as passionate about sports? And usually it was something that looked like this. And I think we've all indulged, and I indulged quite a bit over my career. I also realized that I grew up with it. It was a personal, visceral connection that I had to sports. And so I had already had that innately built into me even before I came to education. That said, when I came to education 9 months ago, I was completely nervous because many of you have been in this industry your entire lives, and I was the newbie, and I'm still the newbie, and I guess I can say that for a couple more months. But what I really realized is that, like many of you, I'm probably asking all the same questions. What does learning do? Who should be involved, and what does success look like? And ultimately, given my background, which I'll talk more about here in a second, I formed my own personal understanding of what education looks like. For me, it started with my dad. My dad was the person that connected me to sports. He was a coach at a tiny high school in Estacada, Oregon. I doubt anybody knows where that is, and if you do, I'll give you a $20 bill after the presentation. It's 20 miles outside of Portland. He coached cross country and baseball, but he did more than that. He actually connected me and inspired me very much around teachers and what teachers do. In fact, both my parents did. So my dad on the left taught high school social studies for 30 years. My mom taught kindergarten for 25 years. I like to say it's what kept the marriage together because they were at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the teaching profession. My sister has followed in their footsteps and is now north of 20 years herself as a teacher. And really what I learned from both of them was the importance of teaching and how impactful teaching is, and that there's no more important challenge than education. And I've been fortunate that because of them, I've had a front row seat in education for several decades. I remember going to my dad's class as a young kid and then later as a student and seeing the students come in and out and really being fascinated by the experience, but then realizing, unfortunately, once those students left, that was it for the day. He had no more contact with them unless they happened to be on his cross-country team or his baseball team. Likewise, for my mother, it was the same. She recruited me to be an aide in her class, and so I would go during my free period as a junior and a senior. And I was amazed at the orderly chaos of a kindergarten class and working with reading groups and math groups. And yet it struck me that when those kids left, the parents had no idea what went on during the day. And that was just the nature of communication back then. In fact, many of us are probably familiar with what communication truly looked like back then. If you remember the ditto machine, you can take a deep breath and probably remember what a ditto machine handout looked like and smelled like. Today, this is what communication looks like. So these are the girls you saw on the earlier slide, a little bit more grown up. My daughter in the middle, Zelly, is about 3 weeks away from graduating from high school, and her sister Ava on the left is about 4 weeks away from graduating from 8th grade. And my wife and I have spent the better part of the last 15 years really understanding education as parents, and like all parents, just wanting the best for our kids and putting them in an environment to succeed. For them, they've been fortunate. They have a phenomenal support network around them that starts with their parents. It includes their coaches, their teammates, their teachers, their classmates, and even their tutors. And it's really what's inspired them to do what they want to do next. Each of these people has had a lasting impact on who they are and who their identities are, and each of these people have helped them develop their strengths and achieve their goals. My daughter's going to go off to college in the fall and study architecture because of the architecture teacher in her high school. And my younger daughter is absolutely inspired by basketball thanks to her coach and her teammates. For my younger daughter, Ava, it goes a little deeper. This is about the time she was diagnosed with dyslexia. And as many people in this room know, that's a very difficult learning difference, and it can put kids in the background, particularly around adolescence. But we've been fortunate in that her advisor and her learning specialists at her school do a phenomenal job updating us on how she's participating and advocating for herself in the classroom. And that allows my wife and I to let her know that we know how well she's doing. Now, Ava's not one to grin or be super happy when she hears her parents kind of patting her on the back, but we know it makes a difference, and moments like that really make us appreciate the support network she has. And it also makes me realize that it takes more than a village to raise a child. It takes a village to educate them. Now, my wife and I have had to work at it. It hasn't been easy. Communication's been a real challenge. We have to stitch it together with email, with text, with phone trees, with wikis. We've used carrier pigeons from time to time to just stay connected to the school and their teachers in that support network. And unfortunately, today, most parents don't really know how their kids are doing in school, even though Americans say that parental involvement is one of the most important priorities in education. And so it's heartbreaking to see results like this from a study that was done in 2012 that says that almost 60% of parents never receive a phone call from a teacher during a school year. And for those that do, it's literally less than half that report that phone conversation that left them very satisfied. But we know teachers are trying very hard. They print off all kinds of handouts that never make it home. They go to the office and try and make voice calls to their parents after hours, only to find that the numbers are no longer valid. And if they do get an accurate number, they leave a voicemail that might not get returned. And so these are real challenges, not to mention the fact that they also have to log all of this even if they're not successful in the communication. So what we have here literally is a failure to communicate. And it's a failure on many levels. Ultimately, life is changing so fast, it's really hard to keep up. And our classrooms are changing dramatically fast as well. So when we go from high 20s even to 30s in class size, that's really not the orderly chaos that I saw in my mom's kindergarten class. That's a little bit more like crowd control. Further, the composition of the classes are changing. We see large numbers, over 4.5 million of English language learners in our class, and that also reflects even more that have parents that speak a different language at home. And for the millions of families that are most poor, it's a challenge for them to get involved as parents when they're really trying to just keep their families housed and fed. And to compound the problem, we're still using a lot of the communication tools that were in my parents' classroom. So this looks pretty old school, but technology doesn't always help either. So teachers are sending more emails than ever that don't get opened and read. And even if you have iPads and Chromebooks in the classroom, it's no guarantee that the family at home is going to have a high-speed internet connection or that the parents even have time to go on a class portal or a website. And so I've come to the conclusion that it feels like, in many ways, parent involvement and their ability to be involved in their kids' education hasn't dramatically changed in the last 30, 40 years. And that's unacceptable, and it's a big reason why I joined Remind. So what if we thought about the workplace? What if we were able to deliver to those schools the same efficient communications that we have access to every day? I mean, I don't think any of us can imagine being without our device, without having access to next generation collaboration tools like Slack. And so it really begs the question, what if teachers had a fraction of access to that type of communication in what they do every day? I think it'd look pretty familiar. So 92% of Americans have a cell phone. 75% of those, 3 out of 4, are smartphones, and that's up almost double from 5 years ago. And we do more than talking and texting on them. We do everything on them. We do all our work on them. We do our banking. We order coffee. If you're like my kids, you watch 1 million videos and selfies a day. So everything happens. But that's not the case in our schools, and it's not the case for our teachers, who find communication one of the most difficult and time-consuming parts of their job. And it's why Remind's been working for the last 6 years to build a platform, a communication service that allows us to connect students, teachers, parents, and administrators in the same way and through the same devices that they use in their daily lives. Families can connect with Remind through flip phones, through smartphones, through tablet computers. They don't have to have an internet connection at home. They can speak different languages. They don't have to leave work to talk to a teacher and find out what's going on with their child in school. And this ease of use and access has driven us to 23 million active users today, which is almost a quarter of the entire K-12 footprint. And it's also allowed us to be now actively used in over 70% of all US schools. So why is student and parent communication so important? Well, quite simply because it works. So a couple months ago, Peter Bergman from Teachers College at Columbia University published a study about this very topic. And in his research, they basically saw that when they send very simple messages to parents about the progress of their students in the schools, it benefits the students and it really leads to meaningful outcomes. This is an example of the simple messages that were sent as part of that study. And you can see that basically, if a kid missed a class, the parent got a text. If the kid failed to turn in an assignment, parent got a message. Kid's grade drop, parent got a text. And so what we've seen, even with these simple messages and what they found in the study, that by the end of the semester, there were meaningful and significant results in the improvement around class failure, failing classes, around attendance, and also around grades. So taking a look at the results, these are pretty dramatic results, and they really impact whether or not a kid's going to graduate from high school. So why are these so important? Well, it starts with information. As it turns out, being able to send those simple communications to the parents really made an impact. Now, unfortunately, most parents tend to overestimate how well their kids are doing in school. And teachers, for better or for worse, they have to rely on the kids to get the information home, particularly in middle school and high school. And for any of you that have a middle schooler or a high schooler, you'll know they can tend to get a little distracted. They're not the best couriers of information, particularly back to the house. And particularly when that information may not be the most positive information for a parent. This scene looks probably pretty familiar to parents that are in the room. This is a crumpled up assignment. This could be a crumpled up notice for a parent-teacher conference. Progress reports never make it home. The update on an important exam or an assignment that can make a difference literally between failing and passing a class doesn't make it home. And what's most unfortunate is that it's the students that probably need the most support and the most help who have parents that are the most in the dark. And as Bergman points out, it's the same principle here. If parents don't know what's going on with their kids, they can't get involved and they can't provide support when they need to. And those messages, that communication has to get home on a regular basis. If it doesn't, by the time they get an end-of-term report card that says what the results are, they've missed an opportunity to get actively involved. So again, as the study points out, information is the starting point. Being able to get that information from school to home is critical. But what's even more exciting about the Bergman study is that it starts to foreshadow the ability that we see every day at Remind about how that information can turn into building relationships. So Bergman does say that there's work to be done to understand how do we optimize those messages in that communication, and even acknowledges that in their study, there were very simple messages and very negative information. So again, let's look at these messages again. Pretty simple, not very personalized at all, unless you're poor Sarah. So for anybody in the room whose name's Sarah, I apologize. But this information is also fairly negative. It doesn't do anything to talk about the achievement that the kids are having in class, which is really how all of our teachers interact with kids and want to interact with kids. Today happens to be National Teacher Day. So by me saying that, I would imagine that maybe for an instant, a flash of a visual of a teacher that was important to you came into your memory. For me, it was Mr. Woods. Mr. Woods taught 9th grade global studies in my high school, and he was the wrestling coach, the varsity wrestling coach, which is an interesting combination because he literally taught global studies like he was trying to put us in a double armbar, which that coupled with the fact that he was built like Arnold Schwarzenegger made me definitely pay attention in class. But what's great about Mr. Woods is that he engaged with every student, and you could tell from the first day of class he was going to fight for your success until the day you graduated. And I think for all of us, the teachers that we remember most are the ones that became our mentors, the ones that gave us advice, their time, and absolutely led by example. They're the ones that, yeah, they cared about how we did in class, but they even cared more about the people we were hoping to be. And when we at Remind can give them the communication tools to have and build the relationships that I had with Mr. Woods, the results can be magical. So some history on Remind. Remind started as a one-way broadcast tool that allowed teachers to send messages out to students and parents. And they gravitated, as you'd imagine, pretty simply to sending out broadcast messages around homework, assignments, exams coming up, field trips. But as we've been able to add more to what they can send and who they can send it to, we see what they do. They get really creative. They start to think about what are the other things that I want to be able to do. They send visual messages and images and photos about what's going on in class. They highlight group activities and things that are going on amongst different students. And they ultimately do fun things like highlight something like Pi Day that goes on in a school and is a special activity. What else do? They take pictures of the chalkboard or the whiteboard and send it home to a kid who's sick. They send out motivational messages to stressed out juniors that are about to take the SAT. And they send an inspirational message to a parent and makes their day about something that was great about what the kid did in school that afternoon. They even like to geek out a little bit around the subjects that they teach. So for any physics majors in the room, this should look kind of familiar. Now, everybody in this room knows how important it is to focus on student success. It's in all the research. But at Remind, what really gets us inspired and what is truly authentic is the amount of communication that we see flowing through from teachers where they talk about how excited, how eager, and how engaged their students are every single day. And so it really is about the ability to build those relationships through communication. Those relationships then start to make teachers feel like, well, do I want to interact with everybody? My sister started using Remind last fall. She was nudged by a certain big brother that said, you might want to start using this in your classes. And she was one of these nervous users who was concerned about managing communication across 4 classes in that way. And so initially she was doing it in a one-way broadcast mechanism. By Halloween, she was seeing that students were progressing far ahead of where they had been in previous years based on her communication. And she was warming up very much to the idea of communicating both with students and with parents. And now it's been just a few months, but she now sees how valuable it is for her to communicate and be able to communicate with a student around an assignment or a parent to ensure that they're going to show up for the parent-teacher conference that they scheduled several weeks ago. So for my sister's classes, building those relationships is really powerful. Her students benefit, but they also benefit because she engages with the parents, and now the parents get involved. And more importantly, they all benefit because that then extends into the ability to foster real learning. People say that education is path-bending. I think that's a good phrase to use. The people that we meet in our formative years, teachers, parents, our other important people in our lives, they're the ones that we don't appreciate at that time how impactful they're going to be and what impact they do make on us. They're the ones that give us an appreciation for storytelling long after we forgot what the book's about. They're the ones that help us find a way, whether it's on the football field or in the science lab. And they're the ones that nurture and cultivate a real passion for architecture, even if the parents don't know what that means. So connecting the student network isn't just about making a student more successful. It's not just about enabling communication for teachers in classrooms, and it's even not just about making school districts more efficient and more flexible. It's about the ability to connect people allows us to think about true fundamental change in education, and that's what gets us really excited at Remind. Changes of this magnitude aren't easy and don't come overnight, but when they come really more as movements than just simply as trends. And they have the ability to affect everything that they touch. They also require more than a vision. They require a foundation. And we have models for what that looks like. These two companies started as platforms to connect networks through communication. Facebook to connect your social network, Slack to connect your work teams. Today, Facebook is where we connect with the people we know, and Slack is where work gets done. Both of these companies, through their efforts, have built industry-changing platforms. Today at Remind, we do all our work through Slack. It's become a much more efficient way to collaborate, communicate with each other, and ultimately to find the people we're working with. It's the first place we go, whether they're sitting at a desk in our San Francisco office or in Wisconsin or Thailand. So in the same way, a school community connected through communication can be a very powerful learning platform. And we build the pipelines for that learning through that connection. And that learning network, though, is more than just connecting students, teachers, parents, and administrators. It really allows so much more to be done. It allows teachers to engage and get feedback from both students and parents through the learning process. It allows students to go deeper on a subject that they're passionate about, whether they discover the content or it's recommended to them by the teacher. And it's ultimately a place where a teacher and a parent can collaborate on an intervention plan around a student that's struggling in math and even bring a tutor in that's been vetted and approved by the school. So we know every school, every class is different. We know every student and family has different needs. A teacher in a poverty-ridden North Carolina elementary school environment has very different challenges than a high school teacher on the Upper East Side of Manhattan teaching a bunch of kids that are going to go off to Ivy League schools. But we're building for both of those classrooms and every single one in between. Because even though we're an ed tech company, we're not about automating education. We also know that technology doesn't teach our kids. Teachers do. So we're not replacing real human relationships with technology, and we're not relying on algorithms to create an understanding of what our teachers do to educate our kids. We ultimately envision a world where our ability through communication to foster access to the resources and people that everybody needs to support how they both teach and learn is fundamental. Remind, our vision is to give every student an opportunity to succeed. And we know that that looks different for every student. It looks like a second grade student that's reading at grade level, even if they're living in a violent neighborhood. It looks like a sophomore who, after leaving their first AP class, has a newfound interest and passion for environmental science. And it looks like that senior who just found out she's going to be the first kid in her family to go to college. Getting there isn't easy, and the kids don't need to do it and shouldn't do it on their own. Not when they have all the support and people around them, and the support networks are already in place. What they need is modern and effective communication that allows them to build the relationships, have access to the learning that's truly path-bending. Education does change lives. It's why my parents dedicated their life to it. It's why my sister works so hard to continue communicating with her students and parents, and it's what I see and my wife see every day with our daughters. These are just some of the people that have helped me form my understanding about education, and it's that understanding that's reflected in how we and I are building this Remind platform, and how we engage with the teachers who are tirelessly working to connect the gap between home and school. And finally, it's really important for us to share that we believe that people are the key to student success, not technology. We see them, we support them, and we have a lot of work to do. Thank you. We are in the process of finishing a round, so I'm still talking to some folks, but we've also finished the first part of that round. Thank you for coming over from Betsy DeVos. The only person who had the worst slot was poor Chris before me at 2:30. Thank you very much.